They're wearing the same clothes. And I was showing this picture a year and a half ago, and one of their, it would be a great-great-grandson was here. I didn't know who he was until he told me. And I flipped this page, and they were looking through, and he said, that's my, whoever it was. And I said, why are they wearing the same clothes? There's 2 years difference. They're not twins. And I knew that. And he said, well, let me tell you. After 14 years, they got out of prison. They spent 14 years of a life sentence and got out. These were the prison-issued suits given them when they got out of jail. And in 1930, they posed for that picture in those suits to take that picture. Now, I've told you all of that to tell you what I was really going to show you. I told you I've got documents all over the place. And this document here is from the trial of Doc and Plight Mahorn. These two guys here, the son-in-laws of Wall Hatfield. These were handwritten depositions. Randall McCoy, Jim McCoy the son, Sarah McCoy the mother, Joe Davis, Dan Witt, Andy Varney, James McCoy and uncle, Jeff Witt, both Doc and Plight give their testimonies. Ellison Cotton Top Mounts, Elijah Mounts, Ephraim Hatfield, three Farrells, the Floyds. Whether these guys, whether they saw them with guns, whether they were at the shooting, all the different things like of the three boys and so forth. Even giving these depositions, they tell a lot about what happened the day the things happened. Okay? Randall starts out, he's the first one. These were handwritten. So when they came to a word that they didn't know what was being spelled, see the blank there?
Right.
You just leave it blank. There's some in here that are blank. Says he proves he is 63 years old. People don't realize this. Randall McCoy was born October 30th, 1825. Devil Anse wasn't born until September 9th, 1839. Randall was 14 years older than Devil Anse. That's a big deal, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm.
He was a lot older man. When this was going on, this was in the summer and spring of 1889 when they're getting ready for the trial. And they're giving these depositions. So he is 63 years old at that time. Randall, a lot older. He says, my boys were in custody at 2 o'clock that day. Notice how they spelled stayed. Anytime they misspelled the word, they left it misspelled the way it was. S-T-A-I-D.
Mm-hmm.
They stayed on the election grounds about 2 hours. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon before they were going to head to Pikeville with them. In the movie, they showed them, and this is some of the things about the movie that's inaccurate that I can tell you too. It shows them starting to Pikeville and Devil Anse gets them and then takes them back into West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
That happened the next day. 3 arresting deputies were John Hatfield, Floyd Hatfield, and Matt Hatfield. 2 cousins of Preacher Anse and a son of Preacher Anse. They were good friends with the McCoys. He talks here. Stayed about 2 hours. You know, if you left from here going to Pikeville, you leave early in the morning in that time. You might get there before dark at night, and you might not. You know what I mean? It's
right.
So they knew at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And there was lions and tigers and bears, oh my, in the woods then. You know what I mean? So they went up to Floyd McCoy's, which is on Blackberry, which is Randall's son, and stayed till nearly night. I was told they stopped and ate supper and they fed everybody. Then they went to John Hatfield's house, which was one of the special deputies, and stayed all night. They literally stayed there all night. Randall stayed, Jim the son stayed, Sarah the mother stayed. Colbert was married. It didn't come out in the movie, but he was married to a woman by the name of Mary Butcher. She stayed all night. The next morning, they got up, fed him breakfast, and started to Pikeville with him. Randall was going to ride with him. And he talks about this. And this is, I'm going to read it just the way it's typed. That's the way they typed it. It written. My boys was next morning, started toward Pikeville in Pike County under a guard of 6 or 7 men, was overtaken by Wall and Elias Hatfield, and then turned back down, stopped at the mouth of Dials Branch. His boys was placed in a large corn sled, and there Anse Hatfield and his squad came up. Well, that night it gave all these guys the time to get their men together to come back over the next morning. They knew they were staying there. And he goes through how they turned them around, went back down to Preacher Anse's house that you're going to go to next. They all went in and ate dinner. It was getting close to dinner time by then, by the time they figured out what they were going to do. Devil Anse was getting mad because some of them was wanting to take them on into Pikeville, the deputies and all this, and he says, you're staying over here. And that's when he steps out on the porch, talks about this here. He said, all Hatfield stand in line, just like he was in the Civil War, buddy, they all stepped to attention. We're taking these boys, and that's when they took them and went into West Virginia that day. That's when Randall then got on his horse and headed to Pikeville. Jim followed and went on down the road with him a little ways, and then that's when Devil Anse said, I've got no use for you now. Turn around and go on back. And that's when he turned the deputies. Get out of here. And he took them back. So it was the next day. Now.
And that's when he took them and hemmed them up in that cabin or whatever,
it was
barn
an old abandoned schoolhouse.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Now, James McCoy, who proves he is the brother, this is his testimony. He kind of goes through the same thing. And in telling that, he tells what happened today, how the election, what they saw. He tells them to fall in line and all the different things that happened. He comes down here. This is now the day, August 9th, when the boys were shot. I left at 3 o'clock p.m. He's talking about where he saw the boys. Went to the mouth of Mate Creek, stayed a few minutes at Sam Simpkins, then went to Asa McCoy's at the mouth of Sulphur Creek. When you get over close to where the pawpaw site is, you're going to leave the cabin. You're going to turn left going to Mate 1. You'll go through a little community about a mile from where the pawpaw site is. There's a outdoor amphitheater on the right, a basketball court, walking track, picnic tables, houses on the left. That little community is called McCarr. You go through it, and then you'll pass a little church on the left, and then the whole mountainside's on the left. That mountain, a road is running right by the mountain. And across it on the other side is the river. That's Utah River. And you're looking into West Virginia. Halfway up that straight stretch, before you get to the pawpaw site, there's a big 2-story house that's across the river on the other side of the railroad tracks. That is Sulphur Creek. That's where he's talking about. He went to Asa McCoy's, which was Sarah's brother. I told you they were McCoy's.
Right.
And he was sitting there that night. And this all happened at nighttime, by the way. They shot the boys at night. So it was getting late in the evening. You do dirty deeds at night. You don't do it in the daylight when people are around. Okay? Went to Asa McCoy's at the mouth of Sulphur. So that's where that's at, and that's who that is. I saw a wall with a paper. Do not know what it contained. He's talking about it. Wall was passing a pact around trying to get everybody to sign it. If they wouldn't tell on who was there.
Who was going to be there shooting.
See, he looks innocent, but they were all involved. They were all, don't know if they signed it or not. Then he comes on down. Saw them again just after dark. Passed by the mouth of Sulphur. They had not been gone perhaps 20 minutes when I heard a volley of guns or pistols fired. He hears the shots that kills his brothers. Okay? He comes on down. My brothers were dead when I found them. He's the one that found them. Randall was in Pikeville. So any of these Hatfield books that you read that says when Randall found his sons, Randall didn't find his sons. After he left them, the next time he saw them, they were burying them on the hill over here. Okay? Jim, the son, found them. Anderson Farrell went with him to find them. Anderson Farrell had married a niece of the Hatfields, but he was good friends with the McCoys. He was between a rock and a hard place, if you ask me, because he liked both of them. When you cross the bridge in the Mate one, after you leave the pawpaw site, you'll go up the hill, you'll cross the bridge, look up the creek, up the river. As you're crossing that bridge, there's a big flood wall. At the upper end of that flood wall, you'll see where Mate Creek enters into the river. That's where they portrayed in the movie. They were crossing the river on horses all the time. You can see how wide. Right now, it's not that bad. I can probably wade across that deep in it. And there's little sandbars and things out there. That's where they would have crossed. The river does a horseshoe there. So when you see that, you're only about 100 yards on around the curve from where you just came from, where the boys were shot. They came out of there and then went up that way instead of toward Mate 1, where the people in Mate 1 could hear. Mate 1 was not incorporated at that time, but there were houses there. Within a few years, it became the town of Mate 1. Okay? So now once you cross that bridge, you go through the flood wall. On the left is the Mate 1 depot. It's a replica train station, a little museum. You'd be interested in stopping there. But from right there, if you look up on the hill, there's a white water tower on the hill that has Mate 1 on it. It's an old abandoned water tower, and there's a little hollow there. That is where Anderson Farrell lived, on the West Virginia side. His house is where they took Ellison to try to keep him alive. They took him across the river. Took him right in that little hollow. It's called Warm Hollow, to Anderson Farrell's house. So you're catching all that. Anderson Farrell went with him to find him. We found him on the Kentucky shore, a short distance from the river, in a sink or a flat, all tied together to 2 pawpaw bushes. Tolbert had one hand over his head. Made examination of my brothers. Found Farmer shot 16 times. Randall with the whole top of his head shot off. 6 or 7 shots in Tolbert. We removed them on a sled, and they were buried in the hall up here on the deal here. Then he comes back to this paragraph talking about the election day again. Who he saw with guns, what happened. Then he comes down talking about at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the day they were shot, what happened, Wall Hatfield and all those. Then he comes down to this last paragraph and kind of rehashes what I just told you, but it's important because the little story I'm going to tell you after that, all of this backs up what I have heard. And I was tickled to death to find this document. He said, I unmounted my horse, pulled some grass and fed him, went back and sat down on the porch. Remember, he's at Asa McCoy's house. I think it was 20 minutes after they passed until the firing began. I think I heard 50 shots. After the volley ceased, there's a blank, so they didn't know what that word was one, and then blank and shot. And I believe that blank is either last shot or final shot. Because the story I've heard was they brought him across the river. Charlie Carpenter tied him to the trees and hung the lantern over their heads. Charlie Carpenter's the man who was running the old schoolhouse. The old abandoned schoolhouse where they took him to was a smaller schoolhouse, and it had gotten bigger, so they moved to a new one, but he was the one teaching. He realized the next morning what was involved and what had happened, and he left town, and they never heard from him again. But he was in on it. First thing Devil Ant said to him was, "You boys are now in Kentucky alive." That was one of the first things he said to those boys, because he had promised their mother, "I'll bring you back to Kentucky alive." Then he asked, "Do you want bandages for your eyes?" The old country way of saying, "Do you want a blindfold?"
Mm-hmm.
And Tolbert, the oldest man, the oldest boy, they were 28, 19, and 18 was their ages. Some say the youngest one was 15, he was 18. He said, "No, we want to see the cowards that kill us." Now, they were tough back then. I'd have been begging, "Oh, baby, please." Or whatever, you know. And Devil Ant said, "If you have any peace to make with your maker, you best be a making." Now, in the movie, he said, "You shoot this one, you shoot that one." You remember he went down the
Right.
line? That didn't happen, because they backed up 15 or 20 steps, turned around, and he hollered fire. Notice here he says, "The firing began, I think I heard 50 shots," and then he talks about the volley ceasing. It was a solid volley, then it quit. When that volley ceased, I know he didn't tell who to shoot what, because the story I've been told, and this backs it up, they didn't shoot the young boy, the 18-year-old. The two older ones were shot. He had not been shot. He's on his knees, hands behind him. He looks over, and his brothers are blown away. He's going into shock. He was younger, he had been crying, but he was a McCoy too. Cotton Top and Cap and them started coming up saying, "Hey, this is your lucky day. We might let you live. If you pray to the good Lord above, we might let you live." They said, little Bud or Randall told him, "Go to hell," and spit at him. And then he passed out. He went into shock and he fainted. And Devil Ant said, "No, dead men tell no tales." And Cap wanted to shoot him, and Johnsy said, "No, you've killed enough." And Alex Messer, his name's mentioned right here and in some other places, got his shotgun, went up, put it to the back of his head. Notice up here, with the whole top of his head shot off, shot him point blank with a shotgun. Blew the whole top of his head off. Down here, the firing ceased, and then, I'm just putting in the words because it makes sense, was one either last shot, final shot. Why would it mention one shot?
What? One shot.
That would have been that last shotgun shot that blew the boy's head off.
Mm-hmm.
I was tickled to death to find this. And in doing so, it tells about some of that stuff. It's all about these guys, whether they had guns, whether they were at the shooting, but in doing so, it kind of tells the story. Now, Randall tells a lot, Jim tells a lot, Sarah tells a lot, and as you notice, they keep going. Each one's telling less and less because some of these guys were at the shooting.
Right.
Ellis and Cotton Top Mounts gives his testimony. "I was present when the three boys were killed on the Kentucky side, opposite a little drain, maybe a little above it, whatever that blank was. Pliant or Doc were not present." So he's testifying that he didn't see him there. Then he starts rattling off names where the boys were killed. Ants, Cap, John Hatfield, Charlie Carpenter, he's the one I was telling you about, Dan Witt, Mose Christian, Sam Mahorn, which is one of the brothers. There was three Mahorns. Jeff Witt, Alex Messer, and myself were present when the killing was done. Jeff Witt, Dan Witt, Mose, and myself were not, we don't know what that word is, present when the guns were fired. We were 15 or 20 steps away. Well, no, he said,
Right, bless him.
how far do you back up when you shoot? 15 or 20 steps, and then you know what I'm saying? Then he talks about how they went across the river. He waded back across the river. Wall told him to keep silent on what occurred that night. And he walked across the river. Then he talks about where the lantern was burning brightly. I could see their faces, knew them all, Jeff Witt and all this, whatever that word was. Some of these don't make much sense because of who's telling.
Right.
And they were going to kill the one, wanted to kill the one they called Dick. Well, Farmer is the one that his nickname was Dick. And the reason they wanted to kill him, he's the one that eventually shot Ellison with the gun. That's probably what did him in. And you notice over here when they said he was shot 16 times, he's the one they filled with lead. They really got him back because they knew who did what. But you can see that it's pretty neat stuff on that, you know.
Yeah.
But you're welcome to look through any of that you want. And if not, that's fine too. But as you can
I
tell,
like hearing it.
I get into it a little bit. And there's so much more that I'll read these books. And as soon as I hear something, I can say, no, that don't make sense. No, that's true. No, that ain't right. You know, I can tell. Now, there are some things that nobody knows. one of the most asked questions I had on our tour, one of the first ones, people ask, how did Devil Anse get his name? I've talked to 5 different Hatfields, and I've gotten 5 different answers, and this is from Hatfields, who are direct descendants.
So you really don't know.
I know the 5 stories that have been told by them. It
Right.
could be any one of them.
And it might not be either one of them.
What started the feud? It wasn't any one thing. I'm sure of this. I think it did start when Asa Harmon McCoy was killed right out of the Civil War. Randall had been captured and was in a northern prisoner of war camp in Ohio. He couldn't do anything about it. People said, well, 13 years went by and he never did a thing about it. He was in a prisoner of war camp. It was in January 7th, 1865, 4 months before the war ended. Uncle Jim Vance hunted him down and killed him in a cave. What's Randall want to do? He's in a prisoner of war camp. Then when he comes back, the war's over. But don't think that didn't set in his mind.
So Randall's brother was killed while he was being held prisoner?
He was at a
traitor, wasn't
who?
The one, his brother that got killed.
No, he was wounded, had been wounded, and they released him to come back. And he was wounded once before and then went back. And then later on, he was at Gettysburg, and
But he fought
no, I'm taking that. Ellison was at Gettysburg. Devil Anse's brother. But he was out of Catlettsburg, Kentucky. He was anything from over the other side of this mountain down to Pikeville was Union soldiers. This side was Confederate.
Yeah.
And Randall was too old to get in the Confederate Army. He was 37 years old when the Civil War started. Now, I think later on, the way the war was going, they'd have probably taken him. But he was already in the local home guard. Devil Anse was an actual Confederate soldier, was a captain. He's the one that deserted. Now here's what happened with that. I'm not saying it was wrong, but he did. He came back and then he worked with the home guard. He had a uncle named Jim Slater Hatfield. He was married to a toller woman. I had a friend that was a toller. That's what it was. Had a friend whose name was Toller, and that toller man had a wife over here at Gilbert Creek. The woman was sick, and they came and asked the general of the same group that Devil Anse was in, which was in 1862 or 63, if they could go visit his wife before she died. And I think it was Colonel Beckley or something like that. And he told them no. Well, that night, they up and got on their horses and left. Went and visited his wife. Here, my little dog eating over there. Son, she's crunching. She's 14 years old. And bless her, she's spoiled. They went over, and he actually got to see his wife before she died. She did die. They buried her. He tidied up things around there, and then they came back 2 or 3 days later. Well, when they came back in camp, the colonel or the general or whoever it was called Devil Anse, who was the captain. That's how Cap got his name. They called him Little Cap, and that's how he got his name, Cap Hatfield. He said, these guys have deserted, are traitors, and they've deserted. At sunrise in the morning, you're to get a firing squad and shoot them. One was his uncle. Well, that night, all 3 of them left. He came back, and that's how he deserted. That wasn't portrayed that way in the movie. In the first part of the movie, they were actually, Randall and Devil Anse actually had fought together on the home guard together. Yeah.
So that part's true?
Yeah, they were on the same home guard. Now, Jim Vance probably was the one that killed him. I don't think Devil Anse did it. Devil Anse was real good at delegating authority, but now he was at the shooting of 3 boys. That was his brother, and now he delegated authority there. We're going to kill you, and yeah. So that much of the stuff is done there, you know. But yeah, it's an amazing story.
Yeah.
Where's the, on the movie it showed us going off in a cave and living up in the mountains. Where is that here?
There were several places. They call it the Rock Cabin. I'm thinking it's over toward, just like this Aunt Betty's house is on that side of the mountain. You go up Mate Creek where they live. You go over that mountain, you come down on Thacker Creek where Uncle Jim Vance is living. Okay? And there are some places up through there, they call it the Rock Cabin, and I think it's in there. I've not seen it. But there's a place up there. You hear a lot of these places on these mountaintops, and I've heard a lot of them. People call them Devil's Tea Tables. Well, they've got one up there that is literally the Devil's Tea Table. It's Devil Anse Hatfield's. And they would go up and meet, and I think it's close to that. I've seen pictures of the top of that rock. It's a big flat rock on top of the mountain. And they would sit there and make their plans, and you could see where they'd been sitting, and about 7 or 8 of their initials are carved in that rock about this deep that are still there. Cat, Johns, John, Cotton Top, Uncle Jim Vance. I mean, there's initials cut in them. And I think it's close to that spot, but I have never been there. Now, I have found Jim Vance's grave, and you can't get there from here. You go to the head of Thacker Hollow where he lived, and you walk through the creek about 30 yards, and then you head up the mountainside, and he is buried about 110 yards along the path, 110 yards from this side of the mountain, coming down from the top of the mountain. It looks like they buried him right along the path where he was shot.
Well, I was gonna say, was he shot right there with his dog and everything like that?
That's the way it looks. Now, the dog deal, I'm not sure about that. I think that might have been more for the movie than anything.
Mm-hmm.
But it really looks as though they buried him. There's a couple other graves up there now, too. They were put there afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm telling you, if you don't know what you're looking for, I've lived in these mountains all my life. I went up there in February, the first year after the movie came out. February, no leaves on, no snakes, no poison ivy. You can see, and it took me 4 hours to find it, but I found it.
Mm-hmm.
And I could go to it quicker now, but just everyday people can't go there, you know.
Right, right.
But yeah, there's just so many things that, and like I say, when I hear something, the Hatfields will tell, and some of their books are pitiful. The Hatfield books are worse than the McCoy books. I've literally looked through and seen, they've got the episodes backwards. They got pictures of some of the people, Troy and Elias and all this, and it's not Troy and Elias, it's Joe and Ellison. I mean, it's just, they don't even have the names right. Now, there's a lot of them that are good, but I'm thinking if I'm a Hatfield, I would at least have the names under the pictures right. They blame Charlie Carpenter for the shooting of the 3 boys. They don't take any credit for it. They don't know who shot those boys. They had them in custody. They took them across the river, and they were taken away by desperados who wanted to kill the 3 boys.
For what reason?
Please, are we,
right.
Are we really that stupid, but they'll swing the pendulum this way, and the McCoys will swing it this way, and the truth's about right here. You know what I mean? There's some real good books. I've read Dean King's book, Altina Waller's book, Lisa Author's got a good book. G. Elliott Hatfield had a good book. He got it off of, a lot of the things he has in his came from Virgil Carrington Jones has a real good book out. And that was written back in 48.
They just signed a thing, didn't they, between the 2 families, an agreement?
Like a treaty?
In 03.
Yeah.
Same time that they went to court over the thing up here, they got that settled. And then the summer of that 03 is when they signed that.
So they talk now.
They talked before then. See the football pictures over there at Belfry Pirates? My boys were on the state championship football team in 03 and 04. There are McCoys and Hatfields on that team. This past year, they won back-to-back state championships again. They're now AAA. That number 20, Clifton Hatfield. Clifton Hatfield. Let me see who else on here is McCoys. Derek McCoy. He's back up here with me. It's my son. It's right there. I mean, there's McCoy and Hatfield. This past year, our top player this past year, he's been the top player for 2 years in a row. He made All-State. He's 5'9", 225 pounds. Built like a fire plug. He was a fullback and linebacker. In the championship game, he had 31 carries, 35 or 40 yards, and a touchdown. Nobody could handle him. Nicest kid you'd ever want to talk to. Then he pulls that helmet on, and he goes into the spaz mode. You know what I mean? You just look at him. But Hatfields and McCoys all over. I've been in houses of both. We take them for granted. There's so many, and our little phone book's about that thick. Smiths make up the majority of phone book places.
On Smiths are crazy.
Are you all a Smith?
He is.
Are you? What I'm saying is the Smiths, in most phone books, aren't there more Smiths in a phone book than any of them? Not in
Or
ours.
Joneses.
In ours, it's Hatfields. The majority of the people in the phone book are the Hatfields. Smiths, I mean, there's a lot of Smiths, but most phone books, if you look through, the majority of them are Smiths. Not ours, buddy. It's Hatfields. And like I said, there are just so many of them around, and we just take for granted because we've been around all our lives. We're born here, you know.
Right. I got some boys that work for me from Harlan, Kentucky.
Yeah.
I said, man, y'all ever been to Shiloh? I said, what's Shiloh? I said, man, you right here next door to me. I said, what's Shiloh? That's a battlefield. Well, we ain't never even heard of it.
You know something? I would love to one of these days. I would love to go to Gettysburg, Charlotte. I've been to Lookout Mountain and some of those down there. But Appomattox and you know, and here's another thing. People around here will come up. Why are people coming around to see places where a bunch of dumb hillbillies killed each other and all this? Because it's history.
Right.
And then I come right back at them. You know, 500,000 dumb men killed each other, brothers and sisters in the Civil War and all this. And that was nothing to be proud of, but people go see that all the time. And that's history. And it is. It's a sad deal.
It is.
And over 500,000 were killed in that, I believe. They say 58,000 died in Vietnam. There was probably more, you know, the attrition of it. Some of these that are missing in action, so forth. But you think about it, 58,000 in Vietnam, over 500,000 died in the Civil War. That's amazing, you know.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah. But, brother, I'm glad you stopped. I'm glad you changed your mind and came back.
Well, like I said, I tried to tell him. I said the sign says welcome, but I guess it's a
We
good
meant-
thing that you come out there and said something.
We
or would've
meant,
just
well,
parked
people had
across the
just
street.
left, and my son had just left. Both of my boys played on those teams. My oldest son was a quarterback. He was the starter quarterback. And my youngest son, he was 2 years younger, but he was the offensive lineman. He was a center. So, buddy, we really had fun that last year. If there was a fumbled snap, the center was saying, I had it right in your hands, you stupid. You didn't hang on to it. No, you got to get it to me. I got to get it before I can hang on to it. Brothers, you know.
Right.
But the youngest one, he's about